Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Friday evening Detroit Lions Lone Wolves podcast. I'm the Doc, John Macaroon, bringing in our college football writer, analyst, Emmett Matasovky. What's going on? Covers Michigan State. We're going to talk, all things about the Detroit Lions. Later in the show, if you're all about the OC search, I'm curious what Emmett thinks about the Lions and who they've brought in. Clearly, we haven't heard too many college names yet, but maybe if there's an outside-the-box name from the college ranks, the Lions could potentially consider. We'll get Emmett's point of view. But today, obviously, when you have a writer who covers the NCAA, covers the Big Ten, and most notably Michigan State, you want to get a sense early on. And we'll have Emmett back quite a bit as we talk and break down the draft. Most likely our draft shows will be Friday, get you to the weekend talking about the draft. But I'm curious, Emmett, here's where we're going to start. When you look at the Detroit Lions, there's always this debate, and I always fall on the side of, if you're playing, I understand players want to win, but you always tend to have an opportunity to improve your draft standing by, if you're playing in a game like for example, against the Bears, it has no meaning in regards to if the Lions win. Like, I understand it's good for morale. You go into the next season having 4 straight winning years, but there were tangible draft consequences, meaning you could have drafted 14th or 15th, but you fall a couple spots. And I know there's some luck factors involved too, but from your perspective, I know you're not going to use the word tank, but what's your philosophy when you see teams like, I know Giants fans are livid. They win games when they have an opportunity to win the number 1 seed, the number 1 overall pick. They're always doing things like that. And you realize, man, it just goes to show you, though, the higher you move up in the draft, the more likely it is that you're going to get a player that can potentially ball. Where do you stand on it when you've kind of looked at football and when people talk about, quote unquote, tanking for a loss?
Yeah, so honestly, it's a very double-edged sword because you want to win for the morale, and you're getting paid to win. And a lot of these guys, especially like your bottom half of the roster, there's a lot of turnover in the NFL, and you owe it to the guys to go to win. And you get paid to win, you show up to win. But at the same time, you have to look towards the future. So my philosophy really, if I'm playing video games, obviously, and my team's in a rebuild, yeah, I'm tanking that last game. But then again, you don't have actual players, actual morale. So I understand both perspectives, and I know it meant a lot to Dan Campbell to go and get that last win, because what are they now, 5-0 under Campbell in the week 17/week 18 games now? I was about to say, correct me if I'm wrong here, John, but I think they're 5-0 all time under Campbell in the final week of the season. You just kind of have to factor in you're paid to win, and at the same time, I mean, Detroit moving down a slot really cost them a chance at, I believe, it was Trevon Walker in the draft, and they got Aiden Hutchinson, and obviously we saw how that one worked out. That worked out pretty well. So yeah, just all depends, and with how this year's draft class is unfolding, I'm not sure if in that mid-range you really are going to have a huge difference in your pick 12, pick 13, pick 14 versus your pick 18, just because there is the positions of need for Detroit. There's not a lot of difference after outside tackle 1, who's going to be gone off the board well before Detroit, even if they went 8 and 9. So there really is just, it's going to be all about scheme fit. And we've also seen that Brad Holmes is not afraid to use the phones during the first round of the draft, as we saw with Terrion Arnold a couple years back.
Understood. Now the line sit at 17. You started to give your thoughts. What do you think so far from what you're reading, what you're surmising? Clearly, Dante Moore now is going back to college. Probably saw that he was projected to the Jets and is like, oh, no, not for me. You recognize that there's going to be some depth, I think, for the defensive ends in this class. But early on, from your early projections and what you're learning and reading, what are your thoughts about the class and what could be available for the Lions around 17?
So overall, this is a deep edge group, so you're probably going to have one or two, maybe not elite, but Pro Bowl upside, potential All-Pro edge options. You're going to have quite a few steady linemen because this is a, quote, weaker, end quote, tackle class. So you're going to have quite a few options who maybe might have been second rounders in years past that are probably going to be creeping into that discussion. I know, like offensive tackle Caleb Lomu was just mentioned by Dane Brugler. So overall, you're going to have quite a few tackles, edges in play. You might be able to get an interior offensive lineman, but this class, there's really a lack of depth. I know Detroit needs a center, and Connor Liu is the top center, and he's coming off a torn ACL. So I know that Brad Holmes is not afraid to draft injured players, but that's probably more of a day two priority, especially when you consider how rare it is to see first-round centers in the first place. You probably will have a few defensive backs in discussion, but then again, you have Ennis Rakestraw, you have Terrion Arnold, both of whom you really haven't gotten to see full seasons of, and you haven't really gotten to see the new Terrion Arnold because he struggled with injury all of last year. I remember when we were watching games, you would see Terrion usually made it to about the third quarter, and then injury struck. So, and then Ennis Rakestraw obviously missed the whole year. So you have a lot in that defensive back room to prove, but at the same time, you could elevate the floor by adding a defensive back. Granted, I am more partial to Detroit getting a tackle at this point in the draft.
Yeah, you got to take it seriously in regards to Taylor Decker. And when Brad Holmes was asked about Giovanni Manu, still downplaying a little bit in regards to his potential readiness, wants him to win the job. And I think it makes sense in regards to publicly. You don't want to put pressure on the kid, knowing that, okay, you got a whole offseason to try and learn and develop. Like, you don't want to put the kid under the pressure of, hey, you got to be the left tackle of the future, and you want him to be a little bit more free. I can understand it, but when you're in year 3, there would be an expectation that, this player can start to develop and at least do some things. But I do want to get your general sense, because now you're going to be somebody that we talk to regularly about the draft and about some players. We are later on. Stay tuned. We're going to pay attention to Dane Brugler's mock draft, like Emmett said, targeted an offensive lineman, and then we'll talk about others as well that could be targeted, maybe even a couple edge names that Emmett has started to talk to target as well. We'll go through probably in our talks, because we have so much time till the draft. We'll go through key position by positions in our talk, as well as key issues regarding the Detroit Lions. What has been your thoughts about Brad Holmes drafts? Clearly, people have noticed, okay, the 21 and 22 drafts really set the foundation for the core of the team, but the 23 draft really is bipolar. When you look at it, the top 4 picks are quite impactful, and unfortunately, after the top 4 picks, the next 4 are not impactful at all. So when you look at it, Jack Campbell, Sam Laporta, Jahmyr Gibbs, you're like, oh my goodness, what and a Brian Branch, oh my goodness, what kind of awesome draft did this produce? But then you realize later on, it got a little bit more tough, and then you started to see in 23 and beyond some more developmental picks like a Giovanni Manu, a Broderick Martin, the Hendon Hookers of the world. So a lot more misses start. But I looked at it, Emmett, from the perspective of the team was going under the assumption that you have a bunch of healthy players, you have the safety spot locked up, you have some linebackers, so you can take a couple more chances on some guys and let them sit. But I do think now, when you see 2 full years of injuries besieging your defense, it goes to show you, I think, that the urgency meter is going to rise in regards to the free agent plan, the draft strategy, to, have your standards, but at the same token, one of the criteria that maybe you adapt is, and we've talked about it now, and you're going to highlight it in all your features, the instant impact meter. What level of time will it take to develop and potentially get on the field and contribute? Because you can only draft so many developmental players, because you could have 2, 3, 4 injuries in a span of a month, and you're looking for depth. And for a team that drafts and develops, it's quite important to get those players from the draft. Do you see potentially where the angst is from the fans when they look at it and say, listen, stop with the projects, be a little bit more urgent and intentional, and draft players that they project to maybe get on the field sooner rather than later? How have you kind of overseen and viewed Brad Holmes' draft over the last 5 years?
Yeah, so like you said, the first couple years you were just had hit after hit. I mean, even looking into the 6th round, James Houston, Malcolm Rodriguez have both played meaningful downs, whether it's Detroit or elsewhere. Then 2023, you had those first 4 picks: Gibbs, Campbell, Laporta, Branch. But then you've really had stagnation during the second half of that draft. And then 2024, too early to judge because Arnold and Rakestraw, as we've mentioned, injuries. Giovanni Manu, he also has had injuries, has taken time to develop because he's not, he's from British Columbia. He's not necessarily, he hasn't gotten to play some of the best every week heading into the draft. So then you have that development, and I know he did not look great against the Bengals earlier this year, and I believe that was his first career start. You have like Tyreek Williams. He hasn't had the impact Lions fans wanted or expected. Tate Ratledge did have a solid rookie season. I would say improving mostly every week. Obviously had those rookie struggles, but then you haven't had those big hits like Isaac Tisslaw, 6 touchdowns last year, but only 16 catches. Really didn't start seeing the field till a Khalif Raymond injury kept him out of practice, and then Tisslaw finally had that chance. But overall, you kind of drafted a few niche guys as opposed to going and getting players that can impact on every down. I think the one thing that really at least confused or frustrated me at the time was the drafting of Sione Vaki during the 4th round in 24, I believe. That's just kind of a special teamer who you're hoping can develop into something, but with a 4th round pick, obviously hindsight 2020, there were other players better available. But yeah, I do think that Detroit in general needs to focus in on getting players that can impact on every down, and that's really where you look. Offensive line, for example. You need to get these guys that impact every down as opposed to the players that really can be situational. Or like, because Tisslaw coming in, for example, you look at it, there's Khalif Raymond already. You already have Jamison Williams. You already have Amon-Ra St. Brown. So you have a guy who's competing for wide receiver 3. That's why, for example, I don't look at a lot of first-round wide receivers when I'm doing my scouting reports weekly for Detroit, because you don't want to take a first-round receiver when you already have a day 2 pick who's going into a sophomore campaign, and you have Khalif Raymond, who's, I believe, on an expiring contract, but could definitely come back to Detroit. You know that those phone lines will be open. And then you really don't want to take your wide receiver 4, wide receiver 5 in day 1 and day 2 next year. Well, this year.
Understood. You look at it and you say the opportunity, and then, what was interesting and a lot of people paid attention to was the amount of capital that has been moved to potentially get a Broderick Martin or an Isaac Tisslaw. So I do think there'll be some aggression from Brad Holmes, but you got to be mindful this year in regards to where you're at. You are going to get that 6th round compensatory pick, so that could move it, I think, to 8 or 9 picks this year. Do you think this year, just overall in strategy, might be worth it to potentially? I know we all say be aggressive, maybe move up for a player. Maybe this year might be the year where you actually consider maybe taking a deal and trading down and getting that 3rd round pick that you can potentially use as a trade chip to maneuver in the draft. I think this year might be the year a consideration might be given to trade down.
I do think for sure it's an option, but it all depends on like how the offensive tackle board, how the edge board unfolds on draft day. Because if you're looking at it and 3 of the top 4 of the top 5 tackles are gone, you might have to stay at your position. You might have to move up just to make sure you can get an offensive tackle, especially with the concern around Taylor Decker. Because you don't want to be left high and dry without a dance partner and without a left tackle of the future, especially after free agency unfolds. So I do think that it really depends on how the draft board falls. But yeah, if one offensive tackle is off the board and you're about to select and you can trade down to 23, for example, or something, get a couple more picks, get an extra third rounder, you probably still have a tackle, you probably still have edges available, and you're not necessarily going to lose much by going from, for example, offensive tackle 2 to offensive tackle 5 this class. My instant impact score, they're all in that 82 to 86 range, and there's not a ton of separation. It's just this player's younger, so he's a little bit higher on instant impact because he has more time to develop. He's not even going to be 20, like Caden Proctor. He's not even going to be 21 by the time the draft hits. So you see that and you say, okay, there's big upside there compared to like Caleb Lomu, who is, I believe, going to be 24 during his rookie season, which still time to develop, but I'm going to have him a little lower because you don't have as long of a prime, for example. So, yeah, depending on how the draft board falls, yeah, you might want to trade down. If you're looking at, okay, I can get offensive tackle 2 or offensive tackle 4, but an extra third rounder, I definitely think that's a no-brainer when you consider the injuries Detroit's had and the depth that they really have proven that they need because of recent years.
Absolutely. And speaking of Lomu, you brought him up. Dane Brugler, great draft analyst, one of the ones that puts out regular mock drafts. He had one for the Lions, and he had one clearly for the league as well. And the player that he took was from Utah. Left tackle, 6'6", 308 pounds, Caleb Lomu. What he's known for is being really, really positive in pass protection, but isn't as dominant or effective at run blocking. So when you looked at that selection, what do you like about this player? What potentially would you think he could do if he gets selected at that spot? Pass protection's key. And are you willing to sacrifice a little bit of, prowess in the run game if you got somebody that at that size could potentially be a top 5 tackle that could come in and potentially be this be the player that you can count on? Or we always know Penei Sewell could also be an option. But what do you think about Lomu? What do you think about potentially that spot being used for Taylor Decker's replacement?
I like the selection of Lomu because you have a left tackle. I like it better than the selection of, for example, Francis Moaga of Miami, because Moaga, I can't pronounce that. He has been a right tackle his entire career at the U, and then you're going to have to look at probably flipping Penei Sewell, which he can do in a pinch for sure, and I definitely think Penei will succeed at it. But you just have to factor in Penei might have to take a step back to start the year in terms of his all-pro level. He might take a second to adjust back to the NFL game after being a dominant right tackle for so long. So Lomu overall, I do have him higher than taking Francis just because he is a predominant left tackle. He only allowed 2 quarterback hits and 6 hurries in all of 2025. That said, he does need to improve a little bit of footwork, in my opinion. He opens himself up a little too much, allows some undercuts, allows people to rush around the outside, making it easy. But yeah, the lack of run blocking, I think that could scare Detroit off just in terms of the scheme fit. But yeah, Lomu is a selection I like for the future. He is a little bit older than, say, Caden Proctor, but at the same time, 24 as a rookie is your traditional rookie-ish age. So it's not a huge deal. But at the same time, that's just something I noted. I think he'd be a reach if he's in the top 20, personally. He would be a guy that I would not mind if Detroit traded down and selected, depending on how the board's unfolding. That said, I'm not against it at all. I think I have him at tackle 3 on my board. So I do think he's a good fit, but there is a concern if he's a fit in Detroit. Just if you're not going to maul in the run game, which when you have the top running back in the league in Jahmyr Gibbs, or at least the most versatile, then you do have a little bit of a concern if your left tackle can't maul guys in the run game and get to that second level.
Look, rankings are rankings. We all know that a lot of times we have these early projections, and things could definitely drastically shake out differently when they do the testing, the combine, the Senior Bowl, all the pre-draft stuff. But what are your thoughts on Spencer Fano from Utah, Francis Moaga from Miami? They went off the board in a lot of mock drafts in the top 10. If they do fall, do you think are any of those players that you would consider moving up for? Are there any linemen? There's a Vega Ionia from Penn State. He's a guard. Do you see any potential position flexibility with some of these other guys that if they do fall maybe, to 12, 13, 14, are there any of those players that you found also, if there's a chance to move up a little bit, could also find some value along the offensive line?
Oh, depending on testing, if a Fano falls to like that 12, 13 range, if I'm Brad Holmes, I'm blowing the phones up because he is your best tackle option. It is a weaker class. Top 12 for tackle grades on PFF this year. He's played at least 11 games at either tackle side during his career. So I do have that as a big upside. You don't necessarily have to just say he's only a left tackle, only a right tackle. He's played both at the collegiate level. He only allowed 5 hurries this year. He is my tackle 1. I don't see him lasting past the first 9 picks. But if for some reason Spencer Fano falls, you have to definitely start ringing the phone if you're Brad Holmes. Francis Moaga, I have him a day 1 starter if Decker retires. He likely starts at right, Panay to left, as I've mentioned. He has a Pro Bowl upside. He's a right tackle. He had good film when I was scouting Cassius Howell. He definitely had good film against one of the premier edge rushers in the class. I do think that he has a little bit of work to do in the run game for sure. But I think that he is a guy that he probably doesn't last outside the top 10 picks as well. That said, I would definitely take him if he's sliding down to 12, sliding down to 14. You're making those calls, seeing if you can get a good deal for both Detroit and the future. And then, Caden Proctor is another guy. I know that he allowed 15 hurries this season, and he allowed 12 sacks as a freshman in 2023. So, you have concerns about his pass protection overall. I'm high on him just because of his sheer athleticism and also his age. I do think that he's still physically maturing when most of these guys he's playing, especially with COVID years and everything in the NCAA. These guys are the closest they've ever been to pro-level players and pro-level bodies because he's playing 24, 25-year-old defensive ends. So I do think that it's a little overblown, and that said, he does have bad habits standing upright. So I am high on Caden Proctor. I'm a believer in him, but we've seen Detroit draft guys out of Alabama before. We know they're not against the SEC. Proctor's a guy, I think I have him like tackle 3, tackle 2, depending on where the fit is. I do have him as a better fit than Francis or Lomu just because of the left tackle ability and the athleticism. But those are really my top tackle options. And then interior, I don't see a ton of guys flexing outside. And just interior is kind of, if tackle's a mess this year, then interior might honestly be worse. I do think that everyone, when you look at the interior, there's, arm length is a concern. Viability is a concern. He's not a mauler in the run game, or his pass block is very substandard, and that's not what you want out of interior linemen. And I don't
so your early assessment is probably not early round. You're not going to get the center of the future in this draft.
Oh, you're not getting there is no first round center in this draft, in my opinion, unless the Penn State guy can kick inside. There's not a first round center. Like I said, Connor Lew is my top guy, but he's coming off an ACL tear, and that's the guy who you might be able to get at a bargain, trade down during the second round, maybe pick up an extra third rounder and trade to that 60, 62 slot. Maybe you can get Connor Lew there. You might not be able to start him the first 4 or 5 games, depending on his recovery. But then you can have a guy who is your good center option. I do think free agency might be the place to go if the Lions are not settled on Graham Glasgow, for example. I think that free agency might be the place to go. But overall, I don't really see the center slot being if you take a first round center, John, I want you to talk to Brad Holmes a little about that.
Yeah. All right, we'll have a discussion. How about day 2 tackles, second round, anybody else that jumps out that, okay, that Saturday draft day where you get the second and third round, anybody jumps out that potentially, or a value pick that you say, you know what, maybe people aren't talking about them, unsung heroes, as we potentially look later on in the draft, because look, most people believe that it's either going to be defensive end first round and then offensive lineman, or they're going to flip flop and target in the trenches pretty early because of the fact that the football team was not as stout in the trenches on both sides of the football. So with a class that's pretty deeper on the defensive end spot, I know you did a report on Cassius Howell. We'll get your sense of him in a few moments, but any other offensive lineman to pay attention to that, potentially could make noise or could be a player that not a lot of people are talking about?
So I do think Jennings Dunker, the tackle out of Iowa, is a guy who I think if you can get him day 2, I think he's a very solid value pick and will bring a lot to Detroit. He's an Iowa lineman, and that really says enough about it because Iowa just produces linemen like crazy, and their production is great. You've seen it basically from any Iowa lineman to go to the NFL. Usually ends up having a very solid career, usually ends up in a Pro Bowl or 2. Their offensive linemen and tight ends, that's what they develop. And so Jennings Dunker is a guy that I am very high on. Obviously, I got to see a lot of Big Ten football this year, so maybe that biases my opinion some. And then got to shout out Michigan State. Interior offensive lineman Matt Golden is a guy I don't see lasting to day 3. I think he's definitely a round 2 stretch. If he gets drafted in round 2 by Detroit, I don't even think I'm happy, even though he's a Michigan State player. I think that he's a guy you trade down into the 3rd round, or you trade up from the 4th into the 3rd. I don't think that he is a second rounder. Even what I watched 40 minutes of his film a couple days ago, breaking it down. There's arm length concerns. He's not really a natural center. He was not a natural center. He only played the last 12 games of his career at the center spot. But he had that versatility. He's played every spot except left tackle during his career between Wake Forest and Michigan State. So he can really pop around where needed, and he can be that 6th guy off the bench for Detroit, depending on how the season breaks out. And then he can really break into a starting role year 2. Which is kind of what I project him as. You see him really get those sparing snaps, get that spot start when you have a guy out, and then burst onto the scene. But yeah, if he's selected in the 2nd round, I don't think I'm happy with Detroit just because I think he's a very firm day 3 pick. Round 3 pick, put it in Sharpie. I think if he falls to round 4, he is a bargain. If he goes to round 2, he's a reach. But round 3, he is the perfect round. Obviously, this is before testing. And if those arm length concerns are overblown, for example, you feel a lot better.
Understood. And, to keep it fair and balanced, anybody on the other side there at Michigan that caught your attention along the offensive line? You did see their running game definitely still continue to thrive, even though, they have the high-profile quarterback. It's a football team that has now, clearly identified what their strengths are, offensive line and the running game. And with Haynes, they were able to do some things. Unfortunately, injuries are always a factor sometimes in Big Ten football. Anybody on the Wolverine side that catches your attention?
In terms of offensive linemen, not necessarily, just because a lot of their guys aren't necessarily declaring this year, are coming back. So you have a very lethal Wolverines front for next season. But tight end Marlon Klein actually is a guy that has caught my eye. I have wanted him to be one of those round 6, round 7 guys for Detroit, just because I think that he could really break out. And obviously, if Detroit ends up going and hiring Arthur Smith, Klein's set for a big year. So I know all the jokes about, tight end 3 being the best spot on the offense if Arthur Smith is coaching offense, for example. So, hey, Klein could have a Pro Bowl year as a rookie if he gets drafted by Detroit late in the process. But yeah, not necessarily Wolverine's offensive lineman, but yeah, I would say Klein is a guy. Run block outside, I definitely like his film on that. And I do think he was underutilized as a receiver just due to quarterback issues at Michigan.
All right. Now, what we're going to feature throughout each week is 1 or 2 profiles. You did one on the A&M defensive end, and it's really great. What happens is that Emmett's going to watch film, give you the breakdown, what they're good at, what people are saying, what the experts are saying, what he's seeing as well from his evaluation. Defensive end Cassius Howell is interesting. Many people are also wondering about his position, if he could potentially, be a defensive tackle or have a career at defensive end. What did you like about him? Now clearly A&M had an opportunity to develop a couple defensive ends that have been in the draft. What did you like about his tape? What do you think about the player? And what is his potential if he does get drafted early? What is his potential for instant impact if the Lions end up going the route of a defensive end?
I think he makes a great instant impact. I think he's a day one starter, especially when you consider Al-Qadim Muhammad probably not coming back. He says he wants to go somewhere where he feels valued. So there's a clear not going to be a hometown discount. Marcus Davenport's gone. Live Anzarike is also gone. I don't see either re-signing with Detroit, really, unless things change. I do like his upside. He can be a defensive tackle. He can be an edge, probably more of an edge. And with arm length concerns, welcome to draft season where measurables is all that it's about. His arm length concerns, I don't think he can be a viable defensive tackle outside of situationally. But what I like about him, he has a very, I would say, polished spin move already as a guy coming out of college. Obviously started in the MAC, Bowling Green, had 9.5 sacks there. Then was a rotational player with A&M in 2024 before becoming a starter. All he did there was become the SEC Defensive Player of the Year. My big concern on him as a pass rusher to start is he doesn't have that second move. If you stop him the first time, he's usually not getting out of it in the way you want to see. He's not getting out to rush the quarterback. Quite a few of his sacks that I saw from both highlight film and overall film, it's just that he relies on a dip speed move, which really works at the collegiate level, but you do not see many NFL offensive tackles getting beat that way. Yes, he played in the SEC and he was able to have it work against the SEC tackles. But NFL, you're seeing the best of the best. You're seeing these guys who are the best of the SEC. You're seeing guys like Francis Muaga every day. And those guys, they never got beat by a speed move. And I think part of that is there's a little bit left for him to develop in terms of with his athleticism. He should be able to have a better speed move than that. And he had 11.5 sacks this year. So I do think there's some development he can have for sure. And I liked the future for him. He was able, one of the plays that I really highlighted was during a pole stunt, I believe it was Francis Muaga actually. He was able to work off of a pole block when he was left out to dry to get blown up by the poler. He was able to work his way out of it and redirect a run play, which that's something I really like to see if you can disrupt the run game as an edge rusher with 11.5 sacks. And you are able to do that against the run. His weakness, though, is the run game. He does not have the consistency. I do think that personally he has upside against the run, like I saw in that film, but he doesn't do it consistently enough. And when you get into day one of the draft, the reason that you are picked 20th overall versus 4th overall is your consistency, really, because all of these guys are elite athletes with elite talents. And the reason why Cassius Howell, I think, could fall to Detroit, he doesn't have the full consistency you need. So I project him as a guy that first year, you might see him really with that, Aiden Hutchinson, like 3.5, 4.5 sacks as a rookie. But I do see him bursting onto the scene, whether it's year 2 or year 3. I see him really being a formidable guy with Hutchinson. And with Hutchinson under that long-term extension, I think that Howell makes a lot of sense for Detroit because, I don't want to say you can afford to wait a couple years. At the same time, it's not like there is a closing Super Bowl window with your star edge rusher leaving in free agency anytime soon. So I do think that Howell makes a good pairing because you can have him develop. You can bring in these 1 year Al-Qadim Muhammad this year, for example, Marcus Davenport, but more productive. Those 1 year stopgaps to rotate in with edge rusher with Howell as he develops and get a veteran who's been in the league a long time to help polish that craft as well. With your line coach and everything, I think that Howell has a bright future, and I think year 2, year 3, he is going to be a star defensive end. But I don't think if you're expecting him to come in and be a 10.5 sack rookie, we don't even see that with top 5 picks. So I do think that he can be a very solid round 1 pick, but don't hold your breath and think that he's going to go and become just this overall superstar that changes the league year 1.
Based on your assessment of Howell, does he remind you of Davenport or Al-Qadim Muhammad? Does he fit the same body type, the same profile of a big lumbering defensive end? And then outside of that, who Howell reminds you of, do you think the Lions also have to mix in, whether it be in free agency or the draft? Obviously you have Ahmed Hassanin. He's projected to, develop and hopefully get a spot. Do you think they need to kind of advance or further their strategy with defensive end to maybe get a quicker, twitchier type of defensive lineman to be able to rush at a rate like similar to James Houston, where maybe not a complete against the run, 3-down defensive end, but do you think you need somebody that is, obviously I think Mekhi Wingo will be asked to develop and you kick him to defensive tackle and he can do some things, but do you think that the Lions also could benefit? And I know we're going to do a more deep dive on defensive end in the coming weeks, but do you think overall that speed to pressure needs to be evaluated a little differently by the Lions?
I do think it needs to be evaluated different, and I do think Howell actually has twitch, which is one of the things I like about him. He hasn't fully utilized his twitch yet, which is something that I do like because that has him dropping a little lower in the draft board and gives Detroit a chance to get him, whether you have to trade up or potentially have him fall into your lap. So Howell is a guy I really like that way. But I do think that you might want to look for your third down edge rusher, kind of like you said, a Houston, just to really add that extra speed, add that extra pressure on the quarterback, bump Aiden Hutchinson inside for those third down situations. Obviously you don't want to spend a first round pick on a guy that really is just a predominant third down rusher. In terms of guys who comparison to, I don't really have a Davenport or a Al-Qadim Muhammad for Howell. I actually have a current New England Patriot, Harold Landry, longtime Tennessee Titan, one-time Pro Bowler. Actually a guy I did watch a little bit of film on when it was time for the trade deadline, to see if, just looking at his craft and seeing if Detroit really had, if he would be a good fit with Detroit. I thought Landry would fit pretty well with the Lions, and Howell really gives you a chance for a younger one and a guy you have longer to develop because he's not going into his age 30 season. He's going into, I want to say, 23, 24. So Howell is a guy that I definitely am very high on, and if he's taken first round by Detroit, I'm grading that a plus because that's what you need. And you have a guy who has an upside. He has good twitch, and he can, if you can develop him a little, he can get that speed going and really have a good dominant move against the NFL offensive lineman. Because you see him have good burst. He just needs to harness it a little more, and he would be probably, I think he would probably end up being the second overall selection, for example, if he was able to utilize that speed and if there weren't as many concerns about arm length, for example.
Okay, before we talk and finish and close with your thoughts about the OC search, recap the names that you're paying attention to, and one name that you didn't mention that another draft analyst that we interviewed last week, he definitely was high on Monroe Freeling, and he's somebody that potentially could move up in the draft. He potentially is a day 2 second round pick, but with the intangibles and things that could go on, is a name to watch as well. So recap, which names have caught your attention as offensive linemen for the Lions?
Yeah, so my first 4 offensive linemen, who I all view as guys probably going in the first round this year, are offensive tackle 1 in the draft is Spencer Fano of Utah, day 1 starter. He's played 11 games at both tackle slots, so I really like versatility there. Your second tackle is Caden Proctor. I know I'm higher on Proctor than most just because of his overall age. I would say days. And then your third selection, right tackle Francis Moaga of Miami. He has Pro Bowl upside. Panay has to flip sides though, which kind of is why I have him a little lower. I would probably have him over Proctor if it wasn't for the fact that Panay has to flip sides. And then Caleb Lomu, also of Utah. He's your left tackle replacement. Only allowed 8 total quarterback pressures last year. And then, Monroe was a guy I definitely have been monitoring. I like you said, he's kind of that second round pick. So if you go Cassius Howell day 1, then Monroe is a guy you have to get you a scout. You have to make sure you're ready for day 2. Same thing with Jennings Dunker of Iowa. I would say that's really my top 6 tackles. Then interior offensive lineman, Connor Liu is the guy I'm high on. And Matt Golban is the guy I think he's a sleeper in this draft. I think you can trade into that 3rd round if you trade down on day 1 or early in day 2. Or you trade up from your day 3 spots. I think that Golban is the guy that makes sense. And I would love to see in the Honolulu Blue. And then for the edge rusher, the only guy we really highlighted is Cassius Howell.
Understood.
Also, Wolverine tight end Marlon Klein. That's another guy who I think is a late day 3 steal.
Yeah, absolutely. And, we'll continue to do position by position as the draft approaches. And the Senior Bowl is going to happen at the end of the month. You're starting to see the list of invites and things like that and who's going to coach. So it'll be interesting. Make sure you stay tuned to Lions on SI and Emmett's work as well. We'll highlight all the profiles as you see on the scroll below. Check it out. si.com/NFL/Lions/on SI. Thanks everybody for smashing the like button. Thank you for becoming members of the channel. That's how we continue to grow. Like, subscribe, hit that notification bell so you know when we fire it up. Most of the podcasts are going to be around 7 o'clock daily, Monday through Friday, and then anything special that pops up on the weekend. I do, Emmett, want to get your sense before we call it a day and get to the weekend. You hear the names. I know that you probably fell out of your chair too, like Arthur Smith. Oh my God, Arthur Smith, Zach Robinson, Jake Peetz, Mike McDaniel. You have a lot of interesting names that have come up. Now, I'm certain the internal candidates are there as well, like the Hank Fraley's of the world, Scotty Montgomery's, Mark Brunell's, David Shaw's. So I'm sure that there's a hefty amount of competition for the job. And you haven't heard the names like Dayball and others. But I think, the fan base, it's pretty fair to say, they fell in love, obviously seeing the videos, the philosophy of Mike McDaniel. They seen how he did with the Dolphins. There's a general healthy a love affair growing because he's the best. And I think that's an amazing thing is that there is somebody out there. Now, he probably is going to be a head coach. So I'm tapering my expectation. And I'm wondering, by the time this airs, is it going to be already outdated? Could the Tampa Bay Bucks already land him and say, you're not leaving ever again? But it's been fun to watch his pursuit of a head coaching job, the suits he's wearing. Everybody's taking a picture of him at the airport. It's fun. But do you like, obviously, I know you'd like Mike McDaniel. What do you like about him? But who is your second choice to say, okay, if we don't get the prime A-plus target, who do you think could run this offense in a way that could obviously run the ball effectively and get Jared Goff some play action? Because everybody has some ups and downs. Zach Robinson didn't really utilize play action with the Falcons. And I know Kirk Cousins' strength. How do you not utilize the best thing that Kirk Cousins does? And you don't really want a guy that just got fired. But I do think Peetz is intriguing. I do think Kafka is the name that I think fans, if it's not Mike McDaniel, I think the former interim coach of the New York Giants might be appealing because of the fact everyone at Ford Field saw the wheeling and dealing, the way in which he it looked like an audition for a job for Dan Campbell. So it's interesting. Who do you like? Who are you crushing on? Who would you obviously will celebrate if it's Mike McDaniel, but if it's not him, who does Emmett want to run the Detroit Lions offense?
So overall, the top two, I would say, like you, Mike Kafka and Zach Robinson are really my top two. I would say if you don't have your dream load scenario where you get Mike McDaniel, because what I like about Robinson is he knows how to utilize a guy with a very similar skill set to Jahmyr Gibbs with Bijan Robinson. Those guys are the top two running backs in the league because of their versatility, because of their ability. And I think he knows how to utilize a guy like that. Obviously, Jared Goff, one of the top play action. I would say one of the top quarterbacks in terms of being able to sell play action. So I do think you need to have a guy that can properly utilize that, just to really give Detroit an extra element. Especially with some people say Goff isn't necessarily elite until you put a good offensive line in front of him, until you give him a run game. But one of the elements where he is elite, in my opinion, is play action. So I think you need to have a guy that can do that. Mike Kafka was able to really utilize Jameis Winston during that Giants game, and I think that I would probably have him just a smidge above Robinson, in my opinion. Like you said, he really looked like he had a good audition for Detroit and Dan Campbell during that overtime game against Detroit. And he knows how to utilize guys with good skill sets. You saw it really with I would say Cam Scatterby at the start of the season. He knows how to utilize a guy that he can be a bruiser, but he can also catch passes out of the backfield. And that really helps fit with, say, David Montgomery, assuming he's coming back and not getting dealt. So I do think that both your top two selections in a non-fantasy world, Mike McDaniels, know how to utilize the top backs on Detroit's roster, which is something I'm really monitoring personally, because if you can utilize both backs, or at least get one producing at an elite level, and let Dan Campbell not worry about the play calling, then I think that it puts Detroit in so much better of a position. And it also helps Jared Goff, because there's the concerns of, can Goff really produce without a run game? And Detroit didn't have a run game the last half of the year, and that's when everything fell apart. So, I would say the top thing to worry about is how you can utilize your running backs, because you kind of know what you got with Jared Goff. You got a guy who's consistent, can make the right reads, occasionally struggles under pressure. And if you can get the run game to help him not deal with that pressure, you feel a lot better. So, I would say Kafka and Robinson are my top two. I don't necessarily hate the idea of David Shaw at offensive coordinator if you're looking internal. I don't want another internal promotion. I don't want another John Morton. But David Shaw is about the only internal name where I'm not absolutely mad. I'm still probably a little mad. I would say probably give me about a 5 or a 6 on the mad scale, but still I could understand it. Shaw's a long-time head coach at Stanford. Really was able to keep Stanford's success around after the Harbaugh years. So overall, I don't hate David Shaw. I'm not going to say that I want him even in my top 7 picks for offensive coordinator. But if you're looking internal, Shaw's about the only guy I see that makes sense.
Always good spending some time talking with my guy Emmett. You can see his work at Spartan Shadows, and you can see his work at Detroit Lions on SI. Make sure you follow at Detroit Podcast on X. You can type in on Google Detroit Lions SI, and you can find our work, or you can see anytime a show drops, that's where you can go to the website. We link to our work. You can see the scouting reports that we do, the mock draft roundups, all the information that you would want regarding who the Lions could potentially select. You will be in the know if you follow Lions on SI. And most likely our Fridays will be talking about the draft and Lions issues. And I want to keep continuing to feature Emmett. He does great work, and he's definitely in the know watching college football. Definitely the Big Ten local regional expert. And now as he continues to expand his knowledge base, he'll definitely pay attention to the college football playoff. we shall see. Quick prediction, who you got? Is it Indiana and Mendoza?
I definitely want it to be Indiana and Mendoza, just for the storyline. And just the way that they've absolutely destroyed anyone in their way during the college football playoff, I do feel good about it. I think they can get Carson Beck uncomfortable in the pocket with various schemes. And overall, there's a lot of Indiana guys that I like in that day 3 selection range, especially like Aiden Fisher was the guy I highlighted. There's a lot of guys I like. Their center, Tyler Coogan, I think that he's a guy who I would definitely not mind seeing in Detroit during day 2. So, yeah, there's a lot of guys to watch, and Indiana's a team I really am excited to see. I'm also really excited to see how Francis Mulaga plays in his final game.
Yeah, you heard it here first. He didn't say it out loud, but Emmett, bold take, he's saying that Pat Fitzgerald's the next Kurt Signetti. I can't believe he's saying it out loud, but let's go with it. Let's go with it, and Whittingham's going to be the next Sharon Moore. I mean, that's a bold take, Emmett, to start the weekend, but
I don't know if we're going to anyone the next Sharon Moore.
Listen, I can't wait to get our talks going about what we think about Fitzgerald. Look, that first video was pretty sweet. We'll go with that. And if they can get anywhere near 6 wins, I think we'll start to look forward and get to the bowl game. That's all we ask. Please get to
the bowl game. At center now, so you have a connection to Detroit already. There's a reason to ride.
Yep. Make sure to keep following and listening to Emmett with his hot takes. I can't believe he'd say that on the air. He didn't say it out loud, but I know he's thinking it. I can't believe it.
I don't know about that one.
Thank you guys for listening to the Lone Wolves podcast. You make it fun to broadcast daily. Thank you for supporting Lions on SI. Again, at Detroit Podcast is where you get all our information, daily articles, videos, and the Lone Wolves YouTube channel continuing to produce content. Even though it's the off season, we are going to continue to talk about the Detroit Lions as many days of the week as possible. The 7 o'clock time slot really works well for a lot of our content. Thank you for interacting in the chat. You'll see me in there as well talking about, let us know. What do you think about the draft selections that Emmett is looking at? What do you think about Cassius Howell? Do you go offensive line first round, or do you go in a different spot? Let us know. We look forward to those type of conversations here at the Lone Wolves podcast. We give our ideas, but the best part is as our community grows, we'll have these in-depth debates. And if there's names that you want us to profile, hit us up. Emmett will definitely dive deep into the film. Let's talk on Monday. Hope everyone has a great weekend. I'm John Macaroon. I've enjoyed speaking with Emmett, our college football regional Detroit Lions on SI college football writer and draft expert. Thanks, everybody. Let's talk next week.